What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 74th or 75th edition of Tequila Tuesday, depending on who's keeping score. I'm Scott Leese, and I am here with my man, Tom Melbourne, founder and de facto head of sales for Open Market. He's going to talk to us today a little bit about outbound team structures for maximizing sales, which if you're in a sales leadership position or you're a founder, right up your alley. If you're a sales rep, or kind of newer in your career somewhere, you might not have had much exposure to this topic before. And so hopefully this gives you some insight into why things are built the way that they are. So without further ado, kind of get out of the way and let Tom take over.
All right, perfect. Scott, thanks so much for the intro and for having me. Really looking forward to sharing everything, with the team today and with the group. Love to make it interactive. So if there's some questions along the way, like don't be shy. Let's jump in and have the dialogue. I'm a really visual guy, so I brought the presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing that, and just start to kind of outlay or lay out what it is I'm going to be talking about and running through today. So at its core, it's just talking a lot about outbound team structures, which I think can mean a lot of different things, and then just maximizing sales capacity. So I wanted to find, those two things kind of like straight out of the gate, because I think depending on, where you live in the world of sales, the types of sales that you might have done before in the past, what I run into a lot in a lot of these conversations is that, we have different definitions and different meanings for different things. And so, some of it might apply, but not all of it, right? And so I think if I can just sort of give you some bounds of which I talk about it in from my experience and the lens that I've seen things through, it'll help to kind of shape the conversation a little bit, as well. And so the two things I'll start talking about is just team structures and then capacity, and then we'll dive into each of those things and sort of what it really means. And so when I think about defining segments, right, and having these conversations around what type of a sale or team it is that we're trying to build, how we're trying to go to market, I break them down into 4 buckets, which I think are pretty common buckets, but I think maybe the variables in which you think about the buckets might have some differences. So the first one is like e-com and self-serve. To me, it's really about the deal size, right? Something that's got up to a 5K deal size, less than a week sales cycle is pretty straightforward. It's a pretty transactional sale, but it probably really doesn't involve sales a whole lot, right? I talk about the relationship too, because I think relationships, really matter in sales, and how those relationships are formed in each of these channels, I think defines a little bit about how I think about, the teams being structured. And so when I think about a digital relationship, I think about just ads, right? Like maybe you're seeing an ad for something, it resonates with you, you've formed like an opinion of a company, and you've got some sort of relationship, but there's nothing personal about this, right? Other than they're just maybe messaging something to you that's super interesting. SMB starts to get a little bit more interesting to me, and starts to fall into like where I love to live. But SMB, now we're involving probably a salesperson, right? It's a little bit of a higher deal size. It's still a little bit more transactional, thinking about things like within 2-week time period of a turnaround. So from a sales cycle standpoint, and also I think the relationships are very highly transactional, as are the sales. And so a transactional relationship is just something like maybe a one-call close, right? Like you maybe didn't know who I was, but I hopped on a call. We started talking about a pain point problem, whatever it is that you have, and I made like a one-call close with you. And so that's how I think about the SMB space. Mid-market is really where I've built my career, and where I've put a lot of like just thought and into building out all these different types of teams and stuff. And so the mid-market size tends to be a little bit bigger companies. But also the type of sale that we're doing, we're going to be able to drive some revenue pretty quick. I think about an 8K to 100K deal size, kind of on average, like a 20K deal. Sales cycles of like 14 to 45 days. One of the reasons why I really love this is just because a lot of my career is also built in like seed stage, Series A companies that are just trying to kind of get out of the gate and go to market, and are trying to learn a lot of things really fast. And so when I have that deal size, I've got some money to work with to fund the team. We can start to build some revenue pretty quickly. But the bigger thing is I can start to get a lot of learnings really quick too, right? If I've got to wait 9 months for a sale to process, and then I go back and postmortem it and figure out all the things that we've learned, I got to wait another 9 months before I see if the changes we made were, effective or not. And so that's a big part of why I really love this space. And the other part of it too is just around the relationships, right? I think that there's so much more happening on LinkedIn where the sellers really get to sort of become like their own brand and become a trusted advisor in the space. They can start to talk about things on LinkedIn. And so I think that when people start to see them as like a source of information, they can come to them and you can start to earn deals like through your own channels as a sales rep. And so the social selling relationships, I think, are something I really enjoy in the mid-market space as well. When we get to enterprise, that's just not me. It's very different, right? I think enterprise strategic, it's like, hey, somebody that sold IBM 4 times at 4 companies they worked with, and if you hire them, they're going to be able to sell IBM where you are now. Like those types of sales are a lot slower, but I think about those relationships being more career relationships. And so that's just trying to kind of give you some bounds as far as the stuff I'm going to be talking about today. It's going to really fit in, well within the mid-market space. Might not apply as much to spaces, outside of that. That's the segment stuff. And then, part 2 of this, title of this is just around sales capacity. And so sales capacity is pretty straightforward, but I think it's good to define, which is really what we're looking for is just get the maximum amount of revenue that your reps can bring in at any point. So finding that balance on a team is really super important because, if we're under capacity, everybody's working out straight. That's not really the bad place to be. I'd much rather have really busy reps that are just loaded with a bunch of leads. But when you go the other direction, you have too many reps, right? Like that's a really dangerous place to be in as well. And sales is all about patience and persistence, and sales leadership is too. And I think a lot of, figuring these things out is just knowing when to sort of hit the gas and when to hit the brake. And what's really nice is that once you get a few cycles going, there's a lot of data that can help you sort of make those decisions, at least directionally, right? Again, early stage stuff, seed stage companies, a lot of the things I'm making decisions around on data is very faint signals, very directional. We're trying to figure out all the metrics and things under the hood to make sure that we're going fast enough and not too fast. And so those are the two things I would sort of lay out as we start to jump into this. And as we transition into deeper into all this stuff, I felt like what made sense was to just organize around this with like the things that I've learned along the way building teams. I think hindsight's 20/20, and if you can pull these learnings out and start to put them into frameworks, that's a really important thing to do. And so I've learned a bunch, right? As I think everybody does in these types of roles. But I think there's 3 key things that I wanted to pull out of this because I think that these are things that I see common mistakes being made. And I feel like I made these mistakes along the way as well. And so the first thing is just around, when you're really early stage or you're stepping into a role, I think a lot of times what people do is they try to find as much of the market as they can as fast as possible. We're all under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, especially if you just raised a round. There's a lot of expectations to start to deliver. And I think that if you haven't seen this show before, meaning if you haven't just gone out and deployed all the accounts, it feels like a really good move. Hey, we're just going to go wide really fast, tell everybody all about our product, and we're just going to get some customers back. And that's going to work well, right? Not really. That was my lesson there, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about how I learned, about these things. And to be quite honest, you're burning out your team and your prospects, right? When you're just going through every possible person that could possibly buy your product. If we're doing like mass messaging or any of those types of things, you're just constantly going after them. We burn through that stuff pretty quick. That's called your TAM, which is your total addressable market. And that's, when I'm talking about assigning TAM accounts. Another thing, and this is probably going to be a point of conversation, but what I found is that assigning TAM into AEs, into territories and named accounts, to me, that feels very old school, right? I think if you understand, how sales kind of got started, let's go back to calling it like door to door. Having a territory made a lot of sense, right? If I got boots on the ground, I'm knocking on doors and, visiting people, those types of things. I want to be close proximity to them. Nowadays, I think with how, decentralized sales teams are, prospects are, all of these things, I like to focus more on regions versus like, you get New York as a zip code kind of thing. I think about it more like East, Central, West time zones. I try to people into like reasonable sort of, times where they can work, accounts in their name. So they're not on, but that's about it. Right.
Question for you on that, Tom.
Yeah.
Is there a particular time or milestone or mechanism, what have you, that you use to say like, okay, we should actually go from no regions at all to now we need to deploy some regional structure? How do you think about when somebody should do that?
So just keeping it broad with regions, but not territories.
Yeah.
So the regions as soon as I can.
So right away then.
Yeah. So well, especially early days, there's always this challenge early days where your TAM might be international. And like, let's just say I'm based in the Bay Area, right? So that's a really tough place to be for international territories. East Coast is a little bit more forgiving. We're talking to, companies that are overseas, and we might be on the phone early in the morning or late at night. For me, the challenge I have with that is like, we are a very small team. And if we're targeting the whole world, then we're putting them again, late nights, early mornings, just really stressing that part of it all out. But what I might do is I might hire like a West Coast rep and an East Coast rep as fast as possible, and then try to start putting them into regions like in that way. So as soon as I have more than one rep, I'm trying to hire that rep into a different region is the short answer.
Good. Okay. Elizabeth, you want to ask your question real quick?
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Elizabeth.
This is great. I sold into all segments, but I'm just curious on your learnings for why you think it's not a good idea to pair SDRs and AEs in mid-market.
So I have a whole slide on that. Can I punt that question down? But I'm going to really address that. And I think it'd be great. That one is a good conversation piece.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
Yeah. So I think we'll definitely dive into that.
Cool. Thanks.
A quick question on the regions part. So as you grow a bit, you've got 6, 7, 9 reps. Are you doing, let's say, 3 East Coast, 3 Central, 3 West Coast, and then is it just open season, or are you defining that any more specifically, or round robin?
Yeah, I would look at that quite a bit actually. And so what I might do is if I can keep it clean like that, I would. But oftentimes the data doesn't really work that way. Right. So then you got to start making some changes and adjustments. But the beauty of setting it up this way is the agility around it. And so what I might actually do is I might have an East Coast rep and then split of Central territory between Central and East. Something like that, where if I have enough, TAM and accounts that are being assigned, it might work in that way. In addition to that, we'll talk a little bit about team structure, but I really believe in like a many-to-many team structure versus like a one-to-one relationship, or even like a one SDR supporting like 2 AEs. And the big part about that is just the agility around being able to make those calls, because a lot of that stuff changes very quickly as we learn more and as we start to do things. And so I'll talk a little bit about that team structure as well. But both those questions will get answered as we kind of go through this. And so I'll definitely dive into both of those answers a little bit deeper. But I'll pause here for a second. If there's other questions, like, love the dialogue. Happy to keep chatting. All right, I'll keep rolling, but please just jump in anytime. The final sort of learning for me was just really, and I think this is an industry-wide forever problem. It's just that marketing and sales don't really collaborate well. And it's a super interesting thing for me to look at and unpack. And one of the things that I really had to learn, as you go through your career in different, parts of your career, ideally you're starting off and learning all of the positions that you're going to be managing. So SDR, AEs, all of those things. And when you finally get to the point of like managing people, and then you start to get into like a VP role, that's where it starts to happen, where you actually start to manage the org. In addition to that, though, you're at the table where you're sideways, your peers with marketing, you're managing up, to the board, to the CEO, you're managing down, and it just becomes like this very interesting place to be. But that's where you start to really learn how to use marketing. And to be quite honest, nobody really teaches you or tells you about that stuff. As sales reps, like you kind of understand that they're providing you white papers and maybe some leads and all those things. But when you're actually managing the sales org and you need to partner with marketing, I didn't really know how to do that very well in the early days. And to be quite honest, a lot of times I might not even have a marketing counterpart with some of the companies that I've joined super early. And so that's one that I like to just talk about, because I think that applies to just every company, whether you're super early. If you're in sales, sales and marketing tend to just have some challenges there that I think could really be smoothed out just by changing some of the structures of the stuff. So I'll jump into that, which everything for me, what I've kind of learned along the way is it all starts with the TAM. And this was through some really hard learned lessons, just not really having a good eye on that and understanding it all. And so the TAM is really just your total addressable market, and how you define that. It could be kind of like anything, as long as it's something that we can filter into a data set, is sort of how I like to approach that. What I mean by that is, we all know who our buyer personas are, our ideal customers. This is what's really going to define your TAM. But if I say, like, for example, my ideal customer profile is something that's so abstract that I can't put into like a Zoom info to put filters on to really understand what that TAM is that we're working, I would argue it's probably not really defined enough, because I can't really understand how to know what's out there, how to find them, how to work them. And then within inside of your TAM, it breaks down even further into things like SAM and SOM. And, service addressable market, that's the parts of the market where you've established product market fit, right? Then you've got service attainable market. If where we have a product market fit is only at, like, for example, Salesforce, Dreamforce, but we can't afford to buy a booth there, then like I can't really obtain then out there. You know what I mean? So there's things like that that you have to start thinking about. And the service qualified market, I kind of threw that in. That to me is like your SQL, sales qualified lead, right? Like that kind of thing. But where I'm going with all of this, and what I really learned early on, is that I start here. Like, to me, this is where all of the planning, where I think I'm going to hit the goals, how I'm going to hire, how we're going to go to market, what messages we're going to use. I've really learned that starts with all of that. And so what I've done is I've taken all this stuff, and remember I said, like, I really care about it being able to be found inside of a data source. Zoom Info is a popular one that people, I think, are pretty familiar with. What I'll do is I'll start to take and figure out what those filters are to build out what I call a TAM dashboard. And the TAM dashboard is just a whole bunch of indicators. But the biggest thing it's telling me is, like, am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Do I need to hit the gas? Do I need the brakes? And on a lot of different things. And so in this particular example, this particular set of TAM that we're looking at was really easy for me to carve out, because it looks at like a particular technology. And it says, hey, if they have that technology, we can work with them. And then in the world, I've got 12,500-ish accounts. And what I start to do, and this is a HubSpot dashboard, you can build the same thing in Salesforce. But we can start to look at, like, how many of those do we have deals with ever, right? In this particular example, I can say I've had 108, which tells me we've got a long way to go. But also, if you look at the middle chart here where it says 1,700, that's how many companies that are in the TAM that I know that we've talked to, or at least have tried to reach out to. And so what that means is we've sent them some sort of an email, LinkedIn, a phone call, but we've logged some sort of an activity, which tells me, when I do the math on this, I've got 10,000, almost 11,000 accounts that are just wide open. And they don't even know who we are yet, right? We've never once sent them an email. We've never tried to connect with them. And so all of these things are for me to just sort of unpack and look at and start to slice and try to come up with the angle that I'm going to just direct the team towards, right? Like, how are we going to start going to market? You can further break it down, because not all TAM is like really created equal. We just talked a lot about international stuff. Well, in this particular TAM, only about 7,000 accounts, 7,500 accounts are in the United States. So if I just said to you, hey, we're a really small team and I don't want to spread us thin, then I probably don't intentionally want to go outside of that. So now my TAM is really 7,500 accounts. And then I start to kind of keep breaking it down more, and I start to look at it. Now, if we have any customers at this point, well, that's amazing, because we can go in and we can start to see what types of customers bought our products. And so this is actually a real example, but like we were looking at sales cycles and how long it takes to be able to, we're trying to figure out how much team we need to hire and all those things, and like what our deal size is, like, should we be a PLG product? So I started to break all this stuff down, a lot more. And the sale is actually very transactional, but we can sell from, anybody from like a small company to like a Costco, and it's going to be sold the same way. But what we really learned, and this is probably pretty obvious, is that they don't buy the same way. And so we would have a really quick deal velocity on mid-sized companies, but we have a really slow one. And it's like, what's the difference? The sales exactly the same. Well, bigger companies, they have way more stakeholders, but then you also start walking into your security, legal, and procurement. And those things just obviously change the game quite a bit. So if we're going to try to target, right, US companies, but we also want a higher velocity sale, and we can go back and look at all of our customers, I can start to kind of tell you, like, the 1,000 accounts or whatever out of the 12,000 that are really going to move the needle for us as fast as possible. And for us, it's going to be like, hey, we're going to be, probably sub 100 million. I don't want to be down in a 50-person company, because it's probably not going to be enough. So I'm really living between like 100 to like a 500-person company. And we'll still build pipeline with bigger companies, but I'm not going to count on those moving as fast. And so really what I said, it goes back to like the gas and the brake, right? What I also want to do with all of this stuff is figure out, how do I figure out the team? Like, one of the things I think I see often, and I think we've all experienced it, is like a company brings on a ton of money and the orders are march and go and like build, as fast as you can and hire everybody you can. And then all of a sudden, like, you're way overhired, right? And maybe you didn't overhire, maybe you did, but what ended up happening is you burned through the TAM pretty quick. And so this is a little bit of a side tangent, but as an SDR and managing them, when I've seen this happen is like they come through the door and let's just say we handed them 1,000 accounts and we said, here's your world. You go figure out your plan. You go find your way to go do it and like, go get them. And then we just leave them alone. Like, first of all, that's awful. But let's just say that happened, right? Nobody's ever heard of this happening before. What happens is the first month they're at it, they're going for it. And then they've identified 300 accounts that they vetted out. Now, the next time they go after this, it's 700 accounts. They're not as excited anymore. Then we go to 500 accounts. By month 3, they're on a plan or something awful. It's just like they're not doing well. And you're like, what is going on? And it's like, well, one of the things that happened is like their world just kind of kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so what I look at here, what I'm trying to talk to in this particular slide is that we didn't need to set it up that way. I think that there was just a little bit of napkin math that could have figured this out in a way better way where we could, responsibly have hired and kept up with the pace and the pressure and demands that we need to hire against, but do it in a really thoughtful manner. And so, listen, if we've got, roughly 12,500 accounts, and let's just say I want each SDR to get 300-ish new accounts every month. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the math and say, okay, well, if I'm doing 300 accounts a month, how many months, that's line 1, is it going to take me to get all the way through the TAM at 300 accounts per month? And in this example, it's 38 months. And then what we do is we just kind of keep adding heads until we sort of figure out how many times do we turn through the TAM. What I want to target, ideally, and I'll talk about this in the campaigns and how we go to target it, is like, I look at it like, look, I want one account in a 3-month, campaign twice a year. And so that's still, I feel like, kind of aggressive, but what that's going to do is it's going to put 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off. And what that will do is it'll tell me exactly how many reps I need to kind of hire. I think 4 is really safe. I think it just depends on how much of that team we can actually talk to and how well we're converting and all those things, but I don't think I would go past 6. And, that's what that chart is there, is it's telling me, once I start with the TAM, and this is why I start with the TAM, because for me, it's like, look, I got to go hire a bunch of people. Well, the next question is who are we hiring, when, and how many? Well, how do I answer that question? It's like, I got to go back and look at all this stuff and look at like, what's the end goal? Like, where are we trying to go? We're trying to turn this bucket of people into customers, right? And these are the people that we're going to be going after. I'm going to pause there and hope that there's some questions. Then there's the next step around like organization structure, roles. And then I'll talk about, kind of how we activate all that stuff through campaigns.
Anybody in a leadership role want to kind of role play or walk through what Tom just did? Anybody in an individual contributor role being asked to prospect more often than that?
I've heard, well, at least me, when I was in the SaaS space and like in the BDR, they said they wanted 300 new contacts added in a sequence per week, like 250. I think it was 250 to 300. That's what they were telling us. And we were SMB, biotech, or therapeutics, or I guess med device and therapeutics.
Yeah, I think that's actually not bad. And I think those numbers really, there's just like, they kind of don't mean anything to me unless I see the rest of it. Right? Because like if you got to get through 300 people to get one conversation, and that's just the way your numbers roll, but you've got 50,000 people to go after, like I'm probably okay with that. I don't know. I want to look at that. But I guess like in a silo, that number kind of doesn't mean anything yet until we start to really unpack all the other parameters around it. And what does that mean? Does that mean then that you're talking to, the same 300 people because that's all they gave you every single month? That's where it starts to go like this, like, hey, we handed you your whole world, and then every month it gets smaller. But I mean, like, listen, that's a good piece of input, but there's a lot of other things that I would want to like know more about. Personally,
maybe this is off topic, but how do you find the total addressable market? Like, what is a tool, a tactic of actually finding that? Like, for example, I go after digital marketers that are doing a $5,000 PPC spend on Google AdWords that are Google partners?
Yeah, so that one, you have to be able to, this is what I rolled back to what I was saying before, to like really get a clear view of the TAM. Like, how do you find them today? If it's Zoom Info, which is an easy one for me to offer up, right? Because you've got, bless you, you've got, you have very clear filters, which I can draw a circle around them. So for you, it might not be as straightforward, but the reality is like, you still have to go find these people. So however you go find them today, whatever you can get eyes on is all that we know that exists in the world. So if you're using Zoom Info, that's great. If you're using some other tool that's more niche to your market, but that's the tool that has the companies that you know who you're going to go after. So I guess the question back to you is like, do you have a tool like that? Or how do you even just go find contacts today?
Good question. I mean, we use Lucia, and really I'm using LinkedIn and just going after already accounts, similar accounts to what we already have, who we've already sold to.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. So what's happening though is that like you may not have like clear filters, like and what I think about, I call it like the fingerprint, but like what is the combination of filters that's going to draw the circle around the accounts for you? You may not have super clear filters, but what you're doing is you're going into like companies. So now what that tells me is that there's probably something about those companies that are similar to others, and then I would just start to draw some proximity around it. So maybe I'm drawing some inferences here, but like there is a specific industry or whatever that even if you're only getting like an 80% match rate when you do this, meaning that 20% of the stuff that you filtered down through whatever method you use is actually not your ICP, you can still use the rest of it and then maybe shave it down with some sort of like rule of thumb that you're willing to like take off. The hardest part though, and I mean, this is sales in general, is that you need to know who you're selling to, and you need to have a clear definition around who that is. And that's like table stakes, right? That's our ICP. Once we know our ICP, we have to know that we can get at the ICP. Because if you can't get at it in that way, why, how are you doing this then?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's got to be some sort of data set, something somewhere that you can use that's going to give you that ability.
Got it. Thank you.
Emma, you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Tom, I am bad at math on a good day. Could you please walk me through where the 333 came from?
Yeah, that was just me putting that number out there. It didn't actually come from anywhere, but I can tell you how I got there with this particular use case and model, right? So for this particular one, and this is a kind of a real situation. We've got 12,500 accounts that we can go after. And now I'm just using some sort of benchmarks on SDR, just capacity, right? Like how much can they do? How much can they work? How much can they actively manage? With these accounts, what I'm also doing is I'm trying to find 3 specific contacts. So really what I'm giving them is 1,000 people per month that I want them to reach out to and to connect with. You break that down over 20 days and you start to kind of plug in the numbers. And I think about how many hours they have to work, right? Realistically, and like what workload they can do. That's where I got the 333 from. But in this particular example, I was just trying to use that as an input so that you could sort of see how I actually got to like the one SDR was going to take 38 months to run through it.
Thank you.
All right, so it all starts with the TAM. Sorry, Scott, were you gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, and that's a big part of the why. I need to know what I'm going after, right? I got to put a flashlight on that and make sure that I can see it, but also make sure we have alignment and make sure that I can teach it. So now for us, it's like once we do all these things, we have to enable. And I got to be able to go to the team and say, here's what we're doing and why. And the team is both sales reps, SDRs, marketing, founders, like everybody, right? I want everybody on the same page that we agree that this is the customers that have the highest propensity to buy what we're trying to do. And these are the people that we should be targeting. And this is what we're going to drive, our revenue from. So from there, we got to start thinking about, okay, now that we know who we're trying to target, like who is going to go target them, meaning our internal team structure, roles, and all those things. I look at it with the most simple model out there. This has been around for a long time, but it's awareness, interest, desire, and action. And to me, this was like kind of a way to steal that and back into here and just keep things super simple. But when you look at this customer journey of a funnel of them going from don't know who you are at all to I'm buying your product, right? These are at the core, probably what I would say is like the four most basic steps. But also what I'm trying to establish here is that I see a lot of companies invest into marketing, invest into prospectors, SDRs, people out there trying to drive interest, and sales reps. And then they they don't really stick to those swim lanes very well. And so it's like, well, if we're gonna hire specialization, we should probably think about, leveraging that specialization. And I do believe that there are some really clear swim lanes and demarcation lines. And so when you think about marketing, marketing is the one that's driving awareness, right? That's going from like, hey, we don't know who you are as a company, product, any of those types of things. So all of a sudden, like, I've heard your brand. Maybe I saw a billboard. Maybe I saw an ad. I skimmed by it. I don't know, but somewhere in the back of my brain, it was there. Now, if they know that we're out there, right? When SDRs start doing their work, which is kind of like the groundwork, I think about marketing more as like air cover. SDRs are picking up the phone, right? They're hitting you up on LinkedIn, and they're sending emails, right? And so if I see an email come across from something that I saw an ad in somewhere in the back of my mind, like, there's a higher probability I'm going to click on it, but at least it won't be the first time I've ever heard the name of your company. Once we get them to the point of like understanding who we are, what we do, and that they have an interest around it, then we can move them into like a demo call with an AE. And at this point, an AE really just needs to find the alignment between a pain point on their side, a priority or a project, right, that they're working on. I think there's a lot of ways you can say this, but this is always sort of what I've leaned on. I think if you're selling something to somebody and they're not aligned on a pain point, priority, or project, like, you don't have something here. I always say, like, if you want to be a priority to somebody, like, you want, to be able to sell to them, then like, you need to understand what their priorities are and why they'd want to buy. And the action piece, I think, is an interesting way to think about this. But a lot of times when we look at customer journeys and stages, like, nobody talks about the actual prospects in, involvement in this part of the process. They have to take action. They have to agree that, the one thing that everybody loses deals to, no matter who you are, what you're selling, is the status quo, is inaction. Right. And so if they're not willing to also do their part in this part of the funnel and take action to choose to become a customer, then you're not gonna have one. Right. So I think it's also really important to understand that, in my mind, like, I think the prospect also has a role in the journey of becoming a customer as well, obviously. And maybe it's obvious to state, but I just think it's one that isn't really brought up a ton. So those are the roles that we're all playing. Right. And then from there, going back to just this thing, it's like, there's a whole bunch of conversations around where should SDRs be paired. And I think for the longest time as a sales leader, I wanted to own it, and I would just fight it all day long. Nope, SDRs go to sales. And I think in doing that, what I did is I actually just created more silos. I created more silos in a sense of like, I sort of had my finger on that one and was like, basically, overseeing all of those things. And the reality is if you partner them with marketing, I think it actually adds a bunch more accountability between those two teams and sort of willingness to work together because they're vested into each other. With that being said, I do think that there's a world where SDRs should be paired with account executives. So to me, it's not as black and white, but I think that world lives more in the enterprise and strategic world. And why? It's like, listen, if a sales rep, knows IBM inside and out and can point their SDR, to the right people to prospect and to get on the phone and those types of things, I think that relationship works a lot better there. When we're below a 10K deal size, just napkin math on what's called a CAC ratio, customer acquisition cost, it's really hard to pay for an SDR if you're below 10K. And so there, again, there are 2-week sales cycles, maybe a 1-call close. I think you can go into the full sales cycle sales rep. And then, e-com self-serve, I almost don't even talk about much because in my mind, it's just like, it's digital marketing. You know what I mean? Like we're just trying to drive ads and relationships through those ads. This is the slide that was asked the question on earlier. So I'll just start to kind of call this out, which I think it was basically, the question was a little bit around, pairing and like who owns the account and all that stuff. This is probably by far the absolute most common structure I see. And it's one that I've run several times and I really have a lot of issues with it personally. It might work well for some. That's okay. I think it's probably a lot of dialogue around this, to be honest with you. But here's what I ran into. I did that thing where I walk in, I get all the accounts out there, and then basically it's like, okay, every AE starts jockeying for which accounts they want. We get named accounts, territories, whatever you want. But what we do is we say, hey, this is your patch, and anything that comes in, anything that happens with this particular account, like, you're going to be the person that works it. And I think and then if we have an SDR where the AE says, hey, we're going to, I want you to go prospect these 100 people for me this week, and then let me know how you do. And we're going to meet next week. Like what I've ran into in that situation is it creates like this mentality. There's two things going on here. There's a team structure and then who owns the accounts. The team structure part of this, when I have the SDR sort of reporting to the AE in this magical pod, it just creates this mentality that the AE, the SDR is working for the AE. And I think it just creates this, we've seen where SDRs, I feel like, don't get a lot of respect from AEs in some situations. It's more of a cultural problem than anything else. But I think that that's part of what starts to lead towards this stuff. And then what we say to the AEs, we say, hey, you're going to take on the SDR, the junior sales rep, good opportunity for you to be a leader, start teaching, coaching, and training them. And some AEs are really excited about it. And other AEs, not at all, right? And maybe they shouldn't be, teaching, coaching, and training SDRs if it's not really what they want to do. I've seen a lot of personality conflicts, especially in a 1-to-2 ratio, where an SDR and an AE might get along better than another one. And then the SDR starts favoring an AE, and then they start, routing or working only certain accounts. And so what I found is that when this works, it actually works really well. But the problem is if I've got 10 teams like this, I probably only have one that's actually firing on all cylinders. And I've got a variation all the way down to one that's just like a train wreck that I'm trying to figure out how to readjust. And so that also comes into staffing issues for me. When I was having those situations where like maybe a pod isn't really working well for just whatever reasons, I found it really hard to have any sort of transitions. Right. And so an SDR gets promoted, quits, any of those things happen, this becomes incredibly disruptive. And so it also makes it really hard to promote people because the pod that's doing really well, I want to promote that SDR. But if I pull them off of that, like I'm basically taking my number one engine and I'm, you know what I mean? I'm turning it off, and then I got to like go back and rebuild that. And to be honest with you, there's not a lot of incentive to do that. It's the right thing to do and you should do it, but it makes it really difficult as a sales leader to say, hey, I'm going to go turn off the number one engine and I'm going to promote them and we're going to go rebuild that thing for the next 3 months. Those are the types of things I've run into. I think the business impact of all this stuff is that it gives, ownership of the accounts, which means that I can't really move them around too fluid. And so what I would see is just a lot of these accounts being, sitting dormant when they could have been working. The lackluster or losing lackluster, what I'm talking about there is like when you've seen the same accounts over and over again, like you start to realize everything going on in them. So what I want to do is keep the accounts moving, to be quite honest. The sales team, different voices in the same accounts. I think when we can move accounts around and we start to get this like conveyor belt of them moving in and moving out, we get a fresh look at them each time. The other thing I really take issue with is that it lumps SDRs and AEs in the same specialized process bucket. And so what I mean by that is like, we don't invest into these roles enough to say, hey, we invested into, outbound SDRs, but then when their AEs aren't getting enough pipeline, we tell the AEs to go do their prospecting. And when SDRs aren't delivering demos that are qualified enough, we say, hey, we're going to comp you when it closes. But the reality is an SDR hands that off and they have little control at that point on whether or not that deal closes based on whatever the AE is doing next. And so for me, those are always like challenges that I constantly sort of face in this type of model. And then most importantly, I think overall, the world is moving more towards like social selling relationships, in my opinion, in the space. And so if you have somebody that's really investing into their brand as an individual, like on LinkedIn, for example, and they're generating a bunch of pipeline, but another AE owns that account that just came in and did absolutely nothing other than own it, I don't have a really good way as a sales leader to get that account to that person without doing a whole bunch of horse trading behind the scenes. And it creates just a whole bunch of conflict and I think inequitability. And so one thing I've learned as a sales leader over time is that nobody cares who owns the account or lead until they want to buy something. And then all the rules of engagement come out with all the sidebar conversations of, well, it's a parent company of this, and that's actually mine because, whatever it is. And then you have a lot of just like challenges as far as getting, the reps. And what all of that leads to is just a really inefficiency in sales capacity. And what I mean by that is, look, I have an AE that's crushing it on LinkedIn, is getting all these leads coming to them, but I can't give them many of those leads. Why? Because they belong to other reps. And we could have the other rep jump in, but like, they're not going to do probably as nice of a job because they don't have the relationship that was created. So those types of things start to like really surface in this type of relationship.
Actually becomes just a lousy buying experience for somebody anyways.
there's that whole side of it.
If Wayne's content is what drew me in, and suddenly I'm working with Matt, it's like, wait, what? It doesn't make any sense to me as a buyer. So that can be a frustrating experience. We got a couple questions here, if you don't mind. Let's go to Chris real quick first. Can you ask your question, Chris?
Yeah, I noticed, Tom, in your wording, you had SDRs partnering with marketing. So would you have them kind of reporting up through marketing? Would you have them reporting to sales leadership? How would that work?
I imagine a world where SDRs end up becoming their own reporting structure, which was just a whole nother taking your question and moving it a completely different direction. But in this structure, I'd have them going through marketing.
Okay. And just to comment, when you said when you have the teams that work well together, you don't want to break them up. I think when you get those teams, it's magical, and you're right. You don't want to break them up. You want to make sure you keep that magic going. But I think where sometimes I've seen, bad relationships between SDRs and AEs. Sometimes it's personality, but sometimes it's a goal misalignment. And what is driving the AEs is not the same goal that's driving the SDRs. Like the SDRs might be comped on sales accepted leads, or sales accepted pipeline, or number of meetings. So they're just pounding numbers out that's not going to actually help drive revenue.
So you're talking quantity and quality. Right. Yeah, balancing that. Totally understand on that one. That one I've got like a whole nother solution for, but that's actually that's like how I ended up building Open Market on a whim, was because of trying to figure out how to balance the quantity quality conversations. But the goals are misaligned. I agree with that. I think that there's a lot to unpack within all that. And I think I can start to kind of do so a little bit more in some of the slides around how to start to take some of that stuff into consideration and address those things. But also I think that same misalignment exists with marketing too. And I think the disconnect of marketing, not necessarily even understanding what they're serving up, or it's not even so much a misalignment or a misunderstanding, but it's like they're just not collaborating is what I feel like is really what it kind of comes down to, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Yeah. Because I think at the end of the day, we're all chasing revenue. We're all trying to get there for that one thing. And so, but what role do you play in chasing the revenue? I think when you don't have clear demarcation lines, it becomes a lot more blurry. And then it's just like, you're probably more likely to blame others around you for, marketing didn't get me the leads. SDRs are setting crappy demos. Well, and then AEs aren't doing their job in closing the deals. But I think when you can draw some pretty clear swim lanes, then it gives you that opportunity to just measure the work that's being produced by each person based off of what they're supposed to produce. Let's talk a little bit about, go ahead.
Well, I got another question here from Kaylee. She's got a question about round robins.
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Don't mind me just eating my dinner and watching. But I wanted to get your thoughts on round robin. And for some background, I actually left a sales role before my company now because I was given like a really bad territory, and it was like a bad experience amongst some other reasons. But the company I'm at now does a round robin approach where both the SDRs and the AE are taking opportunities that way, and they segment it by like SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And it's just the most fair I've ever felt like treated as a rep. No one's ever like worried about like not getting the same opportunities. So just curious if you've seen that work at any other organization and what your thoughts are on the round robin approach.
I like round robin the way that you described it, for sure. And that's actually, so it kind of leads into this slide here where, this is the type of structure you need for a round robin to actually work, which what's happening on here is you have a many-to-many relationship. But what's happening is that, when you're talking about fairness, and probably what you're feeling as a rep is like, I don't know, let's just say you're East Coast, region now. You're no longer like a zip code territory in like Nebraska. Yeah, that's a tough one, potentially.
I do live in Missouri, so very relevant.
All right. So listen, like I've seen really good reps do horrible in companies, and seen really bad reps just do amazing. And there was no difference other than just like where they were assigned. So I think those types of things are real, right? And I think actually you start to limit sales capacity. To be honest, I've studied this stuff enough where there was a really good study that was done, an article that was written, that sales territories reduce sales capacity as much as 25% for situations just like you're describing. I think round robins in that scenario work really well. But it isn't to say that they aren't without all of their own flaws. So I'll keep it simple and just say, look, I really like a round robin in that type of scenario for sure. But the bigger thing that I like about it isn't necessarily the way that they're being distributed. I think the round robins can have all of their own challenges, but I like the structure of what's happening. And the round robin is simply just a distribution method. So the reason why I like the round robin isn't necessarily the round robin. If this is making sense, it's a lot more about the structure that has to be in place for the round robin to work, which is what we're looking at here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I think when you get into this type of team structure, right, we're now talking like a many to many situation where I've got many SDRs supporting many AEs. I like being able to constantly keep accounts moving in and out of SDR space. And I think, quite honestly, if I run into some sort of a conflict, it's way easier for me to make an SDR whole by taking an account from them if it was needed. You know, like in other words, I can swap out something pretty easily. And they tend to be a lot more open to that idea. Now, what happens is like an SDR gets a demo, and what we're showing here is that, you know, they'll go through, call it a round robin, and you know, it goes from one AE to the next, and it's whoever is up next. But what's really happening is, like, let's imagine I lost an SDR to something, right? Got promoted, left the company, whatever it is. You could see that one SDR, like business as usual for the other AEs. They might have a little bit less coming in, but nothing's really changed for them. If I lose an AE, business as usual for SDRs, right? And so if I have an underperforming SDR or an underperforming AE, I can actually start to surface that way faster. Because here's the thing, everything else is equal. Right? If you're an AE and you're getting the same leads from everybody else and you have the same sort of opportunity there, but you're underperforming or overperforming, I'm either going to gain a bunch of insights into what you're doing if you're overperforming, or I'm going to understand like the areas that I can coach you in if you're underperforming. And so anyway, it gives it like an agile team structure, flexibility to pivot and adapt, right, quickly to new changes. I think this is good.
I can't tell who's talking, but somebody's cutting out there.
All right, we can come back to that.
Nobody. Yep.
Yeah, it might have been a background thing, right? We're all working.
Yeah, it's
from home.
possible.
Yeah, all good. But I think, and this is us talking a little bit about stable outcomes. I've got a lot more foundational, metrics that I can build off of with this. And to me, that's super important because I'm responsible for hiring. I'm responsible for the revenue number. I'm responsible for all these metrics sort of hitting. So stability within all of that data is super helpful. It sort of utilizes sales team capacity automatically. So, as we're going through all that, I don't want to just like read off of all this, but hopefully it starts to give you some more understanding. I think a lot of this I've already sort of talked to. But this tends to drive a lot of conversation. So I guess I'll pause if there's like questions on this as well. I'm happy to jump in before I jump into any of the next parts. Really, there's only one other slide, which is very similar to that. This is another way that that same exact thing is typically presented, which is pooling segments. You'll hear it called that, or pairing in pods, right? And so what I'm saying is I like the pooling segment, and then I also like the fact that SDRs are the ones that have the accounts, not necessarily AEs.
Nathaniel, you want to ask your question?
Sure. Do round robins encourage AEs not to prospect on their own?
Oh, I love this question. I couldn't love this question anymore. So what I say to that is, I just talked a little bit about like, hey, listen, I think if we're going to invest into specialization, meaning we have SDRs and AEs, then we should probably hold true to that. And if AEs aren't getting enough, the problem isn't that the AEs need to prospect on their own. It's that like we need to kind of go back up the funnel and fix that and figure out why those things aren't necessarily happening. With all of that being said, I'm good, right? I like to give about 10 accounts, no more than 20. If you have a relationship, if there's something out there that you're doing, but again, I'll give you 10-ish, I'll carve it out. Now, all of a sudden you come to me in a month from now and you say, man, I've been doing all this posting on LinkedIn, all these things are happening. I've got this company out there that just reached out to me and they want to talk to me. Well, I just go in, I figure out, like, first is if the account is just wide open or if it's being prospected by an SDR, I will grab that account, give SDR credit because it's easy enough for me to do that, right? And then I'll go hand that account to you. So there's a couple of ways that I look at that because, like, I think a lot of what I'm saying here is that account executives are going to start building like their brand a lot more and driving revenue in. And if they're doing that, I want the flexibility to have, as a sales leader, the ability to hand them that account and say, go for it. But there's also wrapped into your question, which is like, should AEs be able to prospect? Yeah, I think sure, but I think it's like 10 accounts. And I think if you get rid of one, I'll give you another one, but I'm not willing to carve out 100 accounts in my TAM for you and for 20 people on the team. You know, if I did that, that's 2,000 accounts. So if I only have 12,000, that's 20% of my base. And like, I can't, you know what I mean? So there's all those types of things that are happening, but I'm totally down to come up with a set number, which AEs can sort of like own to prospect. But yeah, that's like how I would answer that.
Owning to
Where's your
prospect
thought?
seems like a good solution to that.
Tom, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If more and more AEs are sort of pulling in leads and accounts via content creation, networking, community, all these methodologies, does that mean the SDR role is in danger of extinction?
Well, that's a great question. I say no, because there's no reason why.
Tell me more about
Yeah.
that.
So like, listen, I don't think that an SDR can't do that either. To be quite
I agree
honest.
with that. Yeah, I agree.
Right.
With that.
So they could start to become sort of the micro brands that are out there, their own personal brands. I think AEs can also.
There's a lot of them who do already, actually.
I agree with that. And I think that those people that are doing that are amazing at what they're doing. And I think it takes a lot of work. So I think that both channels could potentially do it. But then it ties into the next question of, you know, are SDRs going away? Like, I wouldn't say never, but I do think that prospecting is getting just as much harder as things are becoming more and more automated, right? So like, why won't I ever support going back to a full sales cycle sales rep? It's because it's not like it used to be. It's a lot harder to sort of get those conversations started in prospecting, and just to get people's attention. And so I think that we'll probably always need.
Wait. Let me dig into that.
Yeah.
Is there's like a little bit of a time box, I think, where your statement makes sense and is relevant. And let me see if I can articulate it. Because you said you won't go back to full cycle because the game has changed and prospecting methodologies are different and whatnot. So what I hear is that means an old salty dog like me, like, doesn't know how to prospect in the modern way. And I'd be unable or unwilling to sort of rewind the tape and do all those things necessary. But at some point in time, I age out of the market. And the only people left are people who are prospecting these new fandangled ways right now. And people who are coming up behind them who don't know any different. So why can't those people be the new full cycle AEs? Isn't it just the extinction of the salty dogs?
Yeah, I don't know. I think TBD, but where I also see what I would throw in there for another data point is I think there's more and more stakeholders in deals, and deals are becoming way more scrutinized. And so like, I just ran a thing once where we were trying to look at, could we go PLG? And we thought we had a really transactional sale. And when I ran all the data behind it, one sale took like, it was 96 touches on average of activities that we were doing. And so to me, it's like, look, like, how much time in a day do you have to do both? And I think that both sides are becoming more complicated. And so I wouldn't say forever no, that you can't go back to like a full sales cycle. I wouldn't speak in absolutes because I do think that there's an interesting thing happening. But what I would say is I just don't see it happening because I think things are becoming more and more complex and where I'm spending my time. If I got a deal in the thing, you know, in the pipe, and I'm working that deal and I've got to touch that deal 100 times in order for that thing to close, how much prospecting can I actually be doing? I could probably be doing like generating my brand. I think prospecting might change. Right, where you become more social selling and you start to become your own brand entity. Now all of a sudden you're generating your own inbound, which is like almost like mass prospecting. So I think there's a lot of room for all this.
That's my prospecting. That's Wayne's prospecting. It's like the stuff that we do is essentially like demand gen, and that replaces prospecting messages.
So I am really horrible on LinkedIn, and I would never survive in that world. Now, with that being said, the reason why I say that is to each their own. And what I would say to that too is, as a manager, if I have somebody like you on my team, I want to reward that all day long, and rewarding it by saying, hey, you come to me and there's a, you know, clear account that's not, you know, owned by an AE. Like, basically what I'm saying is it's not already in a deal cycle. Yeah. If it's not already in the deal cycle and I can afford to give that to you, I absolutely want to reward that. But I also believe as a sales leader, there's probably, if I got a team of 10, there's 2 of you that are that good at doing that. And then there's a whole bunch of other people that for a lot of different reasons are not.
Yep. Agreed.
And so, yeah, and so what I'm trying to find is the world where we all live in. And how do I maximize the sales capacity on my team by leveraging the things that they're, creating or doing or that they're good at?
Yeah. Wayne, let's go to you. Good question.
Yeah, hey Tom, great to put a face to a name finally. And wonderful presentation. I've not been to many of these recently, but Scott, this pays for my subscription probably for the year. Good job, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Appreciate that.
All right. I love it. Thanks, Wayne.
Yeah, so enough blowing smoke up your ass. Let me ask you a question and make you earn your money. So optimal handoff, what does it look like for you from SDR to an AE?
This is where I don't know how much I could talk about what I built, but I think
fire away, man. Fire away.
So yeah, I think that's a huge problem if I'm being completely honest with you, because again, it just turns into like this, then you got a lot of finger pointing and things back and forth. But I think that the challenges that most conventional sort of CRMs that I've seen, experience is this conversation internally behind the scenes of, where do those notes live? Because is it on the lead that gets converted into an account? Are we already using contacts? Should I put the fields there? Should they go on to the opportunity? All of those types of things. And like, listen, I think any one of these answers potentially could hold water and be valid depending on what it is that you're doing. But I think that there's certain things that we need to know about the account. And then I think there's a whole bunch of metadata that's super interesting as well. Yeah, the handoff to me, it's like you need a good lead scoring place or lead card where I'm capturing the qualifications of deals. And I tend to lean towards less qualified, if I'm being honest. Like, I just want to get into the conversation with people. So if I know, for example, that like we sell to, customers that use BigQuery or something like that, and an SDR gets me a company that has BigQuery, but then it's like, that's kind of all I really want to know. And I'm willing to take that lead, but then there's a whole bunch of other stuff around that lead of things that maybe that prospect has. Sorry, Scott, I'm doing a bad job here because I'm trying to like, not just talk about all that stuff, but.
That's all right. I think you're being too modest, and you should be a little more direct.
Yeah, I almost wish I had like two other slides I could nail that question with if I had a second to pull them up. But the parts of the handoff process that miss in a lot of conventional pieces is all the metadata around it. Is I think the fastest path I can answer that question. And then like, look, I would really ask you to maybe ask me a follow-up question because I think I did a horrible job, and I don't think I actually answered your question. So if you want to like, follow it up.
Yeah. So what harnesses do you have in the pipeline process to keep the SDRs honest? Is that it's the same question, but asked in a different way.
Can you define honest, Wayne? Are you talking about people kicking things over the fence that like aren't ICP and unqualified, or like?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, marketing provided me with a whole load of leads. Like, I just want to make sure that you enrich those leads for them to become opportunities, so that there was something, in addition that the salespeople had to work with. So they so the SDRs are actually earning their keep. And I'm imagining from what you've just described, Tom, that you have a pipeline process and that you are tracking the conversion metrics from one stage to the next, and you're holding your team accountable to a certain score there. And I guess, I'm phrasing it slightly differently, but what I'm saying here is like, if you have that process, how do you ensure that that score from SDR to AE stays at the level that you need it to justify the CAC that you've got in your business? I'm sure you're thinking about this in this way based on your presentation.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It's actually a really hard thing to do. And so where you start to flip levers is we think about qualification, criteria. That's sort of probably like the first one, right? Like, and so then we go into, what's qualified lead. And so you have rules of engagement, you have accepted or not. And so these are all the things that you see people sort of reaching for. And I think all of those are actually really, really hard to to sort of weed all that out. But really what it comes down to for me is I would start to just look at conversion rates for coaching, not necessarily compensation. And that's where I'd want to try to make sure that things are staying honest. But at the end of the day, there's two. What makes this so hard is that you have this multiple thing happening. So I got multiple SDRs supporting multiple AEs, and any one of these that get paired up with another one, and different outcome could potentially have happened. Right? So, okay, so now I've got one SDR, and I think that this is actually really true at almost all of the teams, where you have an SDR that's absolutely crushing it, but every AE knows that when they get the demo from that SDR, it's garbage. It's just a demo. They knew how to get them into a call. But on the flip side of that, I have AEs that really operate very much the same way. And what I mean by that is, like, if they have a full pipeline and you get a round robin lead coming through, they may not actually pay that much attention to it. Why? Because, like, I've got a full pipeline and it's like an okay lead, and it's going to require way more work than I have time for right now. And, like, to be honest, I just don't need it because I'm crushing it. Well, that good enough lead gone to like of somebody who has no pipeline and is willing to talk to a heartbeat and has all the time in the world to work that lead, you know, probably would have put a lot more energy and effort into it, and we probably would have converted it. And so getting all that out there and balancing that is actually a really tough thing to do. But now what we're really talking about is making sure that we understand when those things aren't happening in the way that they should. So I'm going to take probably the course of like a quarter or a cohort of something, and I'm going to break it down into like a whole bunch of data. And what I'm looking for is just like step conversions between them all. And what I'm going to try to start to identify is, like, this SDR goes to all these AEs and, like, that's their conversions. But then an AE might have like a lower benchmark or something, and I can start to pinpoint who it is that's actually having the issues. And then I can start to pinpoint where those issues are. And I think that's all really important to do. And what I think that we try to do as organizations is, like, you'll start to see like things like rules of engagement, qualification criteria, more training. Like, these are the, and we change comp plans. Like, these are all the things that we try to flip levers on, when the reality is it just comes into like looking at data, figuring out what's happening, and then coaching around all of that. And I'm a big fan of coaching around it. I'm a big fan of measuring it, monitoring it, and doing all those things. I'm not a big fan of
find like a green.
Hold on, I'll find the culprit.
Otherwise,
I got him, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's like the fastest answer I had. I actually found the other slides. Maybe we'll talk about that too. But does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Or do you have like more?
I appreciate that. We could go on for hours on stuff like this. I know. So good job making it as concise as you could. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we're doing okay on time, right? That's 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, you're fine.
All right, let's keep moving, because now, so just quick recap, right? We know the accounts are going into, we know who's going after them. We've hired our team, we've got our roles, we've got all that stuff done. And then now it's a matter of actually going in and executing the easy part, right? So all of these things brought in now, right? What I like to do is I like to have marketing sort of be responsible for which accounts we're going to go target, right? I'm going to be very involved in that conversation, but I'm really going to ask them to sort of lean in here. And I think they get some sort of ownership around that. What I mean by that is, like, accounts, ICP, but also buyer persona. I work with a company where we can target CFOs and we can target, like data engineers, and both of them are good targets for us inside of a company, but they're going to have wildly different messaging, and we might have wildly different approaches. Right? Like, IT people tend to have really easy ways of filtering out my emails. They're on LinkedIn, but not as much. So it's like, you got to find paths into those type of people that might be different than others. So all of those things are on the table for discussion when we're identifying first the companies, but then who are we targeting within those companies? And so what I like to do is I ask marketing to sort of say, okay, like, what, I need this many accounts, right? 333 per SDR. I need 3 contacts for each. We'll take care of all the data. We'll get all that figured out. These are the contacts that we're going to go talk to, but now we actually have to put them through some sort of like a cohorted campaign. And month 1 is all about planning. So the first month of a campaign is like me sitting down with marketing, demand gen, whoever it is I have on the team, and start figuring out what are we going to do? Like, what's the messaging we're going to come up with? What's an offer, a compelling offer? Are we going to maybe do like a webinar? Is it just straight asking for a demo? Like, what are all these things that we're going to include? And then all of that planning turns into like deliverables. And I'm going to show you that framework here in the next few slides. Once we get through the planning month, we've got all the deliverables, and we're organized around the work. Now I'm bringing in the team to execute it, meaning like the SDRs and AEs. And so for that first month of the campaign, I'm expecting marketing to do air cover. They're doing digital ads on LinkedIn, searches, like whatever it is, but we've targeted, right? We've honed in on like a very specific set of accounts. So it's kind of like ABM, right? Or account-based selling. But it's actually happening, right? Where marketing is vested in this. They're in it with us, not alongside us, which is what I think happens too often. So now marketing is doing all the air cover. Then I talk about SDRs as like ground cover, right? They're on the ground. And by that, I mean, they're actually, doing the LinkedIn emails and phone calls and working with people that we're already reaching out to. Then, through that ramping up month, I think that, it's like just getting things started, not as many responses. We got to do this for a little while. We got to kind of chase people, maybe have a webinar that we're doing. Month 3, which is really the second month of the campaign, that's kind of like the core of all the activity. That's when I'm going to probably get the most, demos out of this thing, because we've just started to connect with people, the people that were interested, resonating with our message. Maybe they went to the webinar that we had or whatever it was. Now, all of a sudden, like a lot of that's coming back to us. And then the ramping down period, for me, that's just like everybody that said that they would take a demo, but it's got to slip into like their Q3 sprint or whatever it is that they're telling us. Like, we're going to go back and chase the final, parts there. But at the end of that third month, or the month 4 of the campaign, the third month that they've been working it, I'm very intentional about taking those accounts out again. Because I don't want you chasing something that we've been trying to chase for 3 months that's not giving us the time of day. It's probably not the best fit. You want to hold over 10 or something like that, I'm fine with it. You've got some conversation, show me what you're doing. But at the end of the day, I actually want to take and put all those in the back burner for at least 3 months. I want to kind of let them chill out, cool off, let some things change in their company, get a new compelling event to sort of reach out to them with. And so what I end up with is like, I end up with this cross of like one campaign ramping down and one campaign ramping up. And that's where you've got the overlap. And so at any point, what I try to do is get like 2 or 3 of these running at any time, so that an SDR or whatever has, 2 or 3 buckets in different places that they're operating. And I find that it's worked actually incredibly well. The way that we go through the framework, this is like really rough, but I actually did steal this from like a real thing that we were doing. And this is the planning month, right? Where we look at like, who's got the data, who's got the content, who's going to provide all the training, who owns all this stuff, what it is that we're building. Then we go into the execution pieces of it. We talk about laying all that stuff out, what the goals are. And then you can see, in the final 2 columns at the very bottom where, the next campaign is sort of starting and it's overlapping from the first one. When we get into who owns which part, I kind of took out a bunch of names, but we'll look at, data. If I have an ops person, it's ops. If I don't have an ops person, it's probably me. So I'm gonna have to go get it all, right? Or content, like hopefully I've got somebody in marketing that knows how to write good content. Maybe I'll bring in an agency just to get some of those things done. Because remember, I'm in the trenches, early stages stuff. But then also we need to enable the team. I can't just put all this stuff out there without telling them what's going on and how to talk to this and who it is that they're selling to, right? That's such an important part. If I've got them calling on CFOs and data engineers, wildly different conversations, wildly different ways their brains work, things that they care about, I need to understand who that person is, and I need to train my team up on who they're talking to, what their problems are, the things that they think about, how are we speaking their language when we approach them. Like all that stuff has to happen. Once we've done all those things and we've set them up for success, now it's on them, right? And now we just measure all of that stuff. And that's another big thing too, is making sure that we've set some sort of goals that we're going to be trying to hit. And then all of the metrics underneath, right? Making sure that all of those things are converting in the ways that we think that they're going to convert, and that we're keeping an eye on it if they're not. Is it what we set the team up with, or is it like the team not doing it? Like, where does this live? What needs to be fixed? Where do we train? All of those things have to sort of happen. And then the final part is just, once we get all this done, it's really important just to have deliverable dates. So we've identified what the work is. We identified who owns the work. Now we need to, sort of lay out when that work needs to be done by.
Can I ask you a clarifying question? You have written here 10 demos, 20 demos, 10 demos.
Sorry.
Are you talking about demos set or demos actually being held?
I talk about it in whatever way you define it. Yeah, whatever that goal is. Sorry. And the reason
as a politician.
Yeah, but it's true, because it's a loaded question, and I think it just depends. But like, and
well, okay, then riddle me this: in what universe does counting demos set actually matter? Why do I care? Why do I care about a demo that gets set and not a demo that's actually held? Why would I pay an SDR for setting meetings that don't show up?
No, that I would never agree with. I'm 100% aligned on that.
Okay.
I think a demo needs to show, but there are people that say, hey, look, a demo needs to show and they have to have like this qualification. And, we just start bringing it further down the funnel. So I think the definition of what that could be could change. But no, I'm aligned on, look, I think early days people, and it's just such a classic sort of path that I think people take, which is like, okay, we start getting demo set and then it doesn't take you too long to realize like, well, actually they need to show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's in the SDR's control. I'm down with that. I think an SDR can control whether or not, they set a good demo that shows up. They could do some follow-up. We could, get a good relationship established so that they're vested in showing up.
And what do you think a optimal show up rate should be?
Yeah, that's such a loaded question too. I'm going to say, I'm trying to actually go back to my numbers right now and think about, I just did this whole model, but I had, what was my number? 10 to 6, I think. So 60% would show up, or 60 to 80%, I would say, just really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My goal was always 75% of the meetings that get set actually get held. And anything above that is fantastic. Anything below that is disappointing. Anything below 50% is a catastrophe.
That's agreed. There's all sorts of questions going on there. Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think, so I think we're pretty aligned on that one. But that's how I would look at it for sure. Yeah, that's kind of what I had. And it actually went way longer than I thought it was going to. I thought I was gonna be done with that whole thing in 20 minutes. There was gonna be all sorts of fun dialogue.
No, that's because that's because I interrupt you all the time asking questions.
No, it's good. I love it. And if there's any other questions, like I would love to answer anything I can. So if there are questions that you have, let's hop in.
Anybody with questions for Tom?
Yeah, Tom, I have a question. Elizabeth here. You had mentioned earlier that that mid-market buying cycles are moving more to incorporating multi-stakeholders.
Yeah.
Do you have data around that? And if that trend continues, do you think we should be incorporating more enterprise outreach strategies?
That's a good question. I don't have like actual data other than instinct, but also my own data of running and keeping track of all that stuff with teams that I do help, because I do a lot of consulting with teams and stuff too. And just looking at the number of contacts that are involved in a deal. And if you're tracking that, then you can report on it. And if you can see that trend happening over time, then it starts to become kind of clear. And so maybe it's not absolute, right? I don't know if that's true across every industry. Again, I think that you have visibility in certain things that you see, and my lens definitely says that that's happening. And I think that there's probably others that are as well. When you talk about more enterprise approach to it, I don't know if you mean like prospecting, because we're talking more about outbounding, or if you're talking, sales cycle stuff of like, hey, we've got the demo, they're into whatever our sales process is, and then we should change it from that point forward. So I don't know if you have any clarification there on what your thought was. Are you talking top of funnel stuff, or are you talking like mid funnel?
I'm talking outreach. I mean, really that, and I was telling Scott earlier that I'm a VP of multi-time VP of sales, but I've never been an SDR, and I've never been a first line SDR manager. So this is super helpful. This has been great. Thank you. But I have led full cycle enterprise reps with no marketing team and no SDR BDR team. So and it's an interesting, I've led all segments, but there's so many learnings for me in the more transactional sales, because I come from more of an enterprise background.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I would be the opposite. I come from more that, and there's a lot of learnings for me in the enterprise space. But I think the biggest thing I would kind of offer up for an answer is just to start, looking at the data and placing bets and tests, and then being able to make sure that you're measuring and monitoring. But I think when it comes to prospecting, when you're dealing with a lot of stakeholders, what I find as a trap is if you prospect too low, and actually this just happened on a call today, person loved it, not a decision maker, probably isn't even that vested into the product. If they were to purchase it, but liked it, has no power. So then that conversation immediately turns to, well, I'm going to be meeting with my boss in a one-on-one this week, and I'll see if they have any interest. And wow, that sucks, because now they're going and trying to do our job, which is like selling it internally.
Right.
And so I think sometimes it's just a matter of making sure that we're starting high enough up. I find that to be more successful. And I'm not saying this will work everywhere, like depending on what you're doing. And there's probably a lot of really nuanced stuff inside of that dialogue. But I think for me, I would much rather start at somebody where I've got like executive sponsorship, sort of, just to even have the conversation.
Right.
And then I also have a connection back to probably one of the most important stakeholders. And I don't need them necessarily show up on the call. I just need them to know that we're in there having these conversations, so that when this person comes back to me and starts to bring in the buying committee, right, which is like, oh, I got to go talk to like my boss and like maybe some of my peers, and we'll see if this is like a priority for us, then it's just sort of like, well, I already have, you know what I mean? And like, I'm already connected to them, and I don't need to wait on them, and I don't need to feel weird or dirty about going around them. It's just, I go back to that main stakeholder and say, hey, we just met today. They seem super interested, but maybe they aren't quite sure how to start the conversation internally. I'll help with all of that stuff. But I think the biggest thing is just making sure that if we're going to engage multiple people at a company, that it's aligned with something in the company. Like, again, a pain point, priority, or project. If I get to like a CTO and I'm talking about what it is that I'm doing, and they say, hey, you know what, this is super interesting, but I'll tell you right now, like, my resources are scheduled for that particular project in Q3, and this is only Q2. Okay, cool. Like, I won't go bother your team right now, but do I have your permission to call you? Can I do this in Q3? Yeah, or great. Like, can we just talk to your team now and get something scheduled, right? My point is getting that executive sponsorship without necessarily having them involved in the deal, I think, is probably the thing that's going to change the most. And then just testing a whole bunch of stuff along the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's such a great conversation. And that's like, my first tech sales role was at HelloSign. We were selling APIs to 50% of our customers were engineers. And, we had an SDR team. It was my first exposure. I was an IC, first exposure to that. And it was always fascinating to me that we give, because I'm long in the tooth. I'm saltier than Scott here. So
I think that I'm on my way. I'm on my way there. Yeah, I'm like not too far behind it.
I do come from, God forbid, from Wall Street. So I have, a little bit of a different background for tech, and like working, we give one of the hardest roles of prospecting and sales to the least experienced sellers, which are, people that are right in their very first role.
Yeah.
I remember, sitting down, and HelloSign was very mid-market SMB. I mean, it wasn't an enterprise play, but I'd be with the SDRs, and because we all sat together, and I'd be like, look at my, you could do the social selling, but you don't have the connections in your network. So you gotta, look at our CTO, look at our CEO, look at people like Scott's connections, and try to get in that way.
Well, you're like parallel to another topic that's like near and dear to me, which is, I see this happen all too often too, especially early stage companies. When you take on a bunch of money, there's so much pressure to just start going. And the reality is like, you almost start getting ahead of yourself and over your skis. But what I mean by that is, you'd made the comment of like, we've got a really complex role going with the most junior people. I think when you're starting, that's another reason why I really like marketing involved in like controlling, like, especially early on, like the message of what we're doing and things like that, and like how we're delivering that message. And so I love a situation where marketing, if we're doing emails at scale, which again, there's a whole nother conversation, personalization, relevancy, like all these things, like how should you email? Like I'd leave that on a table for a second, but let's just say that we do have a lot of emails going out. I don't really want an SDR, or somebody else made a comment like, oh, I'm expected to put 300 new contacts into the CRM every day. What? Why are you doing that? Like, no offense, but like, that's a lot of work for you to have to figure that out, right? A lot of responsibility for you to understand who you should be reaching out to. If marketing and me and whoever else are sitting here looking at a dashboard, and we've done this a few times, it doesn't take long to take 12,000 accounts, turn them into 1,000 hottest prospects we should be targeting. Like, why am I having an SDR do it? And so I think that there's things that we can do to enable them better, is really where I was going with all this stuff. But there's also just I think a big gap in the industry of just understanding how much work it takes to do this role, but to train these teams, like to have, you can't just hire them and not know what you're doing and expect they're going to figure it out. Like, we own that. We need to know what we're doing. We need to sort of come up with that, I'll call it a playbook, but like strategy. And then I need to enable them and train them and teach and coach them and help them get better at it. And so to me, that's just like a whole nother adjacent topic to similar to what you're talking about.
I love that. I love that quote. I'm going to go back and watch it again. You said something like, you can't expect people to know what they're doing if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, true. But I've seen that a lot, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
We don't know how
I
to get
see
a
it every
pipeline.
day. I see it
Yeah,
every day.
yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Anything you want to send us home with, Tom? Any final parting thoughts?
Wow, that's probably the most important part of this and the one I put the least amount of thought into. Other than like, listen, if this is top of mind for you and you're out there trying to build it, I love to connect. I don't do a great job with it. I just said I'm not great on LinkedIn and all those things. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to give you some of my time to talk about this stuff and just share with you some of the things I'm doing, maybe a little bit more in detail. And just happy to help, if I can in any way. Outside of that, I think, final parting thoughts, just thinking about this is like, really for me, the lessons I've learned is start with the TAM and just, kind of start working your way through all of that. It just starts to kind of fall into place. And just be really intentional, right, about what you're doing and how you're doing it, and just have that, right. I think, man, I might even be quoting you, Scott. Somebody somewhere along the way said, like, when you start to learn the game a lot better, the game starts to slow down a lot more.
Oh, I think I said that actually.
I think you did say that. Did
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
definitely something that I've said before.
Man, what a parting thought to end with, is Scott Lisa's own words. But I think it's so true, and it started to really, really resonate with me, because the first couple of times you do this, you do have all that pressure and you're just trying to perform and you're trying to like make it all happen. And then when you've seen this, thing happen a few times, you start to understand where to slow down, how to slow down, and that it's actually, you're speeding up. And I think that just comes through experience. And so what I would really encourage is just that you take that time, be very intentional about what you're doing, be very deliberate, be very measured. And you won't end up in a situation where you've overhired, underhired, not hitting goals, those types of things. And you're going to be, honestly, the board loves these data charts too. If you ever start presenting to them, they get a really good feeling around what's happening with the business and can be a lot more helpful to you too. So yeah, I don't know if those are parting thoughts, other than quoting Scott, but
Perfect parting thoughts.
yeah. But no, I'm available to chat with anybody. I'd love the conversation. And if this is something you're working through, please be happy to chat.
Yeah, connect with Tom, give him a follow, send him a thank you. His LinkedIn profile is here in the chat and it's in the Slack group. And check out his company. He's a little bit too modest to talk about, but check out Open Market, see what they're up to, and maybe it's for you. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks.